Transfer rules in college football have been reshaped before our very eyes in recent years. We've got a current case at Oklahoma involving TCU and Oklahoma in an in-conference transfer that's caused a bit of a stir. We got Jason Ray on the line from Last Word on College Football to break down the Sooners. Jason, how are we doing today?
Doing good, Mark. Thanks for having me on. I think it's exciting to talk about football here this spring. We didn't have it last spring, so even if it's off the field type of stuff and spring practice and stuff like that, it's really good to be talking about football this time of the year.
So I'll give you my understanding of the situation with Chandler Morris transferring from Oklahoma to TCU. So he's made that transfer. It needs to be cleared by the previous school. Gary Patterson, head coach for TCU, had commented this week after a practice that Morris had not been cleared by Lincoln Riley. Then Lincoln Riley was asked about it and basically said that it's being worked out, but made a claim very definitively that he is not in favor of players transferring within the conference and being immediately eligible. And then he made some fairly vague statements leading to it being worked out.
Yeah, I think this is something that Riley is pretty passionate about. He's very, very close to the vest. A lot of coach speak that you get out of him in terms of his weekly press conferences, but he took an opportunity to speak, sort of at length about this, Mark, on his media availability on Monday this week. And to your point, Mark, I think it was a little bit of a surprise coming in a couple of weeks ago. I think a lot of people thought, it was just a foregone conclusion. Tanner Mordecai's at SMU, looking for that immediate eligibility. And then certainly Chandler Morris did the same thing at TCU. Then Gary Patterson mentioned that. And then Riley was asked about it really at length. And, at the premise, I really agree with his idea here. What he's looking at is it really creates a bad precedent for kids to be able to, really just decide that, this isn't a good fit, move on to a different school within the conference and be able to play immediately. We talked a little bit offline here that, it used to be when a kid would transfer, it was an automatic. They knew that they were going to have to sit out a year. Well, now that there's different circumstances and the NCAA has given a lot of waivers, and it seems to be more the norm. If you're more of an expectation from these kids' perspective that if they go and they transfer from one school to another, they have the expectation, especially this year with all the COVID rules that were in place, that a lot of these kids thought they would be able to transfer without any sort of penalty to play. So, and I think it has been something that Riley has taken a lot of flack in the national media over just, letting this kid play and releasing him. So look, I mean, not to say anything bad about Chandler Morris. He's a 4-star kid. He was a really good dual threat quarterback out of high school. Really, it probably has an opportunity to compete for that job with Max Duggan, next year at TCU, should he be available. But with Oklahoma having Rattler and Chandler and Caleb Williams right now in the forefront in the quarterback room, it's not something that where I feel like Riley's nervous to have this kid come play against him next year. I think it's really just the precedent. He doesn't believe that anybody should be able to leave from one school to another within the conference and be able to play immediately. And you think about, like, on the offensive side of the ball, does it create any advantages? Chandler Morris, learning the Sooner playbook and maybe bringing that over to Gary Patterson and that team. Sure, a year is not going to make a whole lot of difference in terms of that, but really just setting that plan in place that's something that's going to be able to to be done throughout the years without any consequences is something that he doesn't want to see. And like we've talked a little bit about before as well, Mark, that you have some of these kids that have that expectation. It's sort of a millennial type of thought process that if I'm not going to get to play here, then I'm just going to take my ball and go elsewhere and go play here. And it's one situation. If you have a kid that's been on campus for 3-4 years, he's waited his turn, and he's just not quite good enough to play and not there. Maybe you feel a little bit differently, but this was this kid's first year. He was a true freshman this year. Riley tried to integrate him into the offense a little bit, got some playing time in some of these, some of these blowouts later in the year, and scored a touchdown on a third down play against Iowa State in the Big 12 championship game. But I think it's an interesting topic that I'm sure that we'll keep going, and I think it will probably go above Riley's head. The NCAA will probably make some sort of determination, but I think at this point Riley's staying strong on his stance that he doesn't want to see that happen.
Lincoln Riley made some curious quotes here. So here's my interpretation: is that first off, there are rules in place. So you would think the rules would dictate as to whether how this would proceed, meaning that a player decides to transfer, the player is not eligible to play at the next school within the conference unless the conference and or the school, and I don't know what the pecking order is there, but the conference and or the school give clearance. Well, Lincoln Riley makes the comment here: it's a fluid situation right now. Our plan is just to this play, not let him play necessarily, let this play, let some of these rules solidify, which seems like a curious statement, that let's let the rules solidify. Aren't the rules the rules? And the rules have been established and they're not changing or being voted on. And we'll be open to watching it and seeing how it unfolds. And so that seemed a bit odd.
Yeah, I think the only thing that I could probably take from that, I mean, to your point, Mark, the rules are the rules. I think the only thing that he may be pointing to there in that quote was really just kind of talking about, the NCAA said earlier in the year that any transfers would be able to be eligible to play immediately because of everything that happened with COVID this year, kind of similar to the seniors coming back. But I think the NCAA's backtracked on that a little bit, and I think they haven't necessarily confirmed that be the case. So if anything, that could be the angle that Riley is going through. And I think probably even reading more between the lines in that comment where he's saying, I'm not going to clear him, but if the NCAA says yes, then I gotta comply at that point.
Got Jason Ray on the line from Last Word on College Football. Would encourage you to head on over there to check out his work and the rest of our friends over there, Kevin McGuffey, Tony Siracusa as well. Again, it's Last Word on College Football. Talking Oklahoma here each week with Jason, and they have yet to pop pads there on the field in spring practice, but there is some information coming out of camp.
Yeah, so the first week, Mark, they've primarily been in t-shirt and shorts, no pads, as you mentioned. But there's a couple of things that have come out on both sides of the ball that's really interesting that people might be wanting to hear about. There was Riley kind of challenged the wide receivers earlier in the spring when they had their when they kind of started some of their workouts here in the off season before spring practice even started. So there was a guy that the receiver room was. You had Marvin Mims, who was, has been well established last year as a true freshman year. But there's a few guys there that, needed to step up, a couple of 5-star guys. So by all indications, Marvin Mims has been clearly the number one guy so far in spring. Some of the catches that he's been able to make and, outstanding plays, and his speed has really kind of shown itself even more so this year. Riley even talked a little bit about maybe we didn't even use him as much as we could have in his freshman year, and he was, one of the best freshmen in the country at any position last year. So, to see that evolution from him, from last year to this year is good. But Jaden Hazelwood is a guy that has really, really stepped up in practice. They said early in the first couple of days, catching pretty much everything that's around him, catching in traffic, which he struggled with a little bit in his first couple of years. Granted, he hasn't played a whole lot, but he has struggled a little bit catching the ball in traffic. And then another guy that was really talked about, we had talked about the running backs and, Kennedy Brooks, coming back from that opt-out year, not necessarily going to be the starter, but some guys that'll have to work for their position. One of the guys that Rattler mentioned was Seth McGowan, played a decent amount as a freshman. And then Rattler was really talking about his work ethic in the offseason thus far, in terms of the weight room. He's put on a lot of weight. He's competed at a really high level. So I think from the offensive perspective, those are some of the things that you would like to see, some competition specifically from the younger guys. And then at the wide receiver position, a couple of guys solidifying themselves and, really just needing a couple more to, kind of fill out that, out that roster. And then, on the defensive side, Alex Grinch had talked a little bit to the media on Tuesday, as well. One of the guys he singled out was Jeremiah Cradell. We've talked about him in some of our positional previews as at the safety position as a guy that may have an opportunity to play a little bit, specifically with the losses at safety that we had with Brendan Bradley Hiles. Trey Norwood at the nickel position had left. Trey Brown is a cornerback, but still an overall secondary group. He's a guy that said hadn't really seen a guy improve more from year 1 to year 2 in the system than Jeremiah Cradell. So I think that's good news from a safety position for Oklahoma. And then there's been a couple of position changes that were a little strange that you would see, especially this early on. But I think spring is a good spot to move guys around, see where they fit best. Justin Harrington, who is a guy who came in last year, is one of the best safeties in the country from the junior college ranks, was in a position to play a lot last year. Had that injury early on, basically as the fall camp started. He's been moved to defensive back at the cornerback position, so he's playing a little bit at corner. And then Kendall Dennis, who had played, a couple years scout team guy, who's fairly highly recruited out of Florida, 4-star guy. He's moved over to a safety position. So I think it's really just kind of an idea for Grinch to kind of look at some of those kids and see where they fit best. We've talked about Billy Bowman a bit. He started it. He's going to the defense as of right now. I think he has the best chance to play early on, probably more so in the defense at the nickel position, more so than maybe at the offensive side of the ball and the receivers. But I think a guy that, we haven't talked about, and I think a little bit under the radar, who has had many coaches and, kind of some of the media and some of the guys that have inside information in terms of, who's playing well, who's doing all the things that they need to do. Jordan Mukes is a true freshman out of Choctaw, Oklahoma. He's not incredibly highly recruited guy, at 6'3", 6'4" kid, safety position. He's been all over the field. He's been, they had what they call a hell week a couple of weeks before spring practice started, where they put the kids through just a lot of tough drills over and over. And they said that he was one of the kids that really stood out, which is difficult for a true freshman because they, at that point, they really don't know what to expect, don't know, it's much different than, some of the drills and some of the conditioning stuff that they go through at the high school level. But he's had through some of their 7-on-7 and scrimmage type things throughout the week. He said 5 interceptions so far. So that was a kid that a lot of people thought that, might have had a chance to, be a second, third team. But, he could be if he keeps playing like this. You always see there's a couple of kids that you see play really well in the spring and then they're really never heard of in the fall. But, this could be a kid that if he keeps improving, keeps playing well at his size, and then the athletic ability I mentioned before, could have an opportunity to get into that rotation as a true freshman.
Mukes out of Choctaw, Oklahoma. And to Jason's point, outside the top 300 rankings, according to 247 Sports Composite, even though he is the 5th rated player in the state, according to their rankings, tall guy at 6'4", 192. Jason Ray talking up Oklahoma. And as Jason alluded to previously, we've got position previews available for you. So just look them up right here. Just go to the search menu on the channel and look up Oklahoma quarterbacks, running backs, wide receivers on down the line, both sides of the ball. Jason and I have run them down. Jason, appreciate you stopping by as well, of course. And again, check out Jason's work at Last Word on College Football. You see there on the banner there, you get a free Oklahoma mask if you register for free at voiceofcollegefootball.com. We've got about 35 teams available, including the Sooners, 20% off your first purchase when you get that coupon code. So just go to voiceofcollegefootball.com and register for free there. Jason, we appreciate you stopping by. We will see you in about 1 week.
All right, Mark. Thanks for having me on.